Welcome back. As a seminary professor who specializes in theology and who has a special interest in studying and teaching eschatology, I am often asked this question. Do you think that the Antichrist is alive on earth today? That is a very good question. A bit of thought will confirm that the answer must be yes. However, further thought will also show that the answer has been yes ever since the departure of Jesus Christ at his ascension. Let's see why. The first step in answering the question, is the Antichrist on earth today, is to recognize that whoever the Antichrist will be, and whenever he will step onto the stage of world events, he must be a full-grown adult before the tribulation begins. Why? Because Scripture teaches that the tribulation period, which will begin with the signing of a treaty by the Antichrist, must begin after the rapture. Scripture also indicates that the rapture is unpredictable. Even Satan does not know when the rapture will take place. That means that Satan must have a man prepared to step into the role of Antichrist at all times. Just as a fireman must be ready at all times to extinguish a fire, Satan must have a man groomed and prepared for the role of Antichrist at all times. The second step in answering our question follows from the first. Since Satan must always have a man prepared to step into the role of Antichrist, and since humans have finite lifespans, the unavoidable conclusion is that Satan has had many individuals prepared for the role of Antichrist ever since Jesus ascended into heaven. In fact, it seems highly likely that at any given moment since the church began, Satan has had several candidates on deck, if you will, ready to step into the role of the Antichrist. A bit of sensible speculation can even help us to make an estimate of the number of candidates that have already lived and died in the last 2,000 years. Obviously, the Antichrist must be a powerful figure in human society before he begins his role at the start of the tribulation. Let's be generous and assume that it is possible for a man as young as 30 to be such a figure. Let's assume further that the Antichrist will not likely be more than 80 years old when he comes to power. That gives us a window of about 50 years during which any given candidate can be considered ready to step into the role. Let's assume further that Satan has always had at least one such candidate ready. That means he needs to have at least 2 candidates per century. That would mean that in the last 2,000 years or so, Satan has had at least 40 candidates ready to step into the role of Antichrist. Of course, this is a very conservative estimate. It seems likely that Satan has had to have more than 40 candidates, since it seems unlikely that he could begin the grooming of new candidates at exact 50-year intervals. Once we realize that Satan has had multiple candidates for the role of Antichrist, we can see that when past generations suspected in their days various popes or kings or U.S. presidents or prime ministers, they may not have been very far from the truth. Human history is certainly littered with powerful and evil men who might have served Satan in the role of Antichrist, who have now passed off the world scene through death. By the way, nothing requires that these candidates have to know that they are being groomed for the role. A careful study of Scripture allows for the possibility that when the Antichrist begins his public ministry at the beginning of the tribulation, he may not know himself that he is the Antichrist. It's clear, though, that by the midpoint of the tribulation, he will know that he serves Satan. But it is entirely possible that the Antichrist will begin his role with the signing of the treaty of Daniel 9:27 with no other goal than to bring peace and order to the world and to advance his own political ambitions. The subversion of his will to become a willing servant of Satan could take place within those first 3.5 years through the common temptations of power, money, and sex that have always been successful in transforming men into willing servants of Satan. What does that mean for our day? It means that there are surely viable candidates for the Antichrist living on our planet today. Whoever they are, they must come from the ranks of the powerful and elite, though not necessarily from the ranks of the famous. It also seems clear that such candidates cannot be truly born-again Christians, for no true Christian would oppose Christ or speak the blasphemies that are so characteristic of Antichrist. Potential candidates will probably come from the ranks of spiritual leaders, wealthy businessmen, entertainers, and politicians, though other sources are possible. As we come to the end of episode 12, in which we have addressed the question, is the Antichrist on earth today? And as you think over previous episodes, I hope that you can see that God has not given us sufficient evidence to identify the Antichrist beforehand. There are simply too many possibilities and too little evidence. In the remaining 2 episodes of this series, episodes 13 and 14, I want to discuss the mark of the beast and also how we can apply our knowledge of what Scripture reveals about the identity of the Antichrist. I hope to see you in the next 2 episodes.